I am so excited that you're back with us again today for the Go Forward broadcast. This is your evangelist, Bobby Tenner, coming into your home, your tablet, your phone, or whatever way you're tuning in today. We are so thankful to God for you being here today as we continue to share God's word. I'm excited because if you've been looking at our previous broadcasts, we've been in this series talking about real faith. And as we drill down a little further today, I've been trying to get to this last part of verse 8 so that we can really go deeper into understanding why having faith in the Almighty really matters. We're looking here at Luke chapter 18, verse number 8, the last portion. We'll see where it says in verse, that C section, will he really find faith on the earth? This is Jesus talking, and he has given us a great parable about this widow who had been wronged, and she was able to get relief because of her persistence. I love the way the NLT version says that she was driving that judge crazy, and that's what made him give her her relief. But the part that we really want to focus on today, it says that when the Son of Man returns, will he really find faith on the earth? And so the question I have for you is, what's the big deal? As we talk today about it's all about faith, what's the big deal? It's a faith thing. Everybody talks about having faith. And you say, well, why are you making such a big deal about this concept of faith? Well, I wanted to tell you why today. If you look in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, I think we've used it as a key text a few times leading up to today, but I want us to focus on a word in here. It says in verse 6 of Hebrews chapter 11, but without faith, it is impossible. Focus there. It is impossible to please God. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. The word we really need to look at if we're asking that question, what's the big deal about faith? It says, without faith, it's impossible to please him. Now think about that, impossible. We've watched Mission Impossible before, when the individual was able to work through a series of clues, a series of messages, and get through tunnels and places that for most people it would have been impossible to get through to ultimately achieve the goal of getting the bad guy. So it seemed impossible, but that character, he was able to make it possible. But the reality of it is, when we see God use a word like impossible, it means impossible, which means that it's not able to be accomplished. It can't be done. There's no way for it to occur. Now think about that, my brothers and sisters, and anybody else who may be seeking and trying to get an understanding of what it means to walk by faith in the Almighty God. Impossible. So that tells me that faith must really matter. That's why it's a big deal. Is that God says if you don't have it, if you don't exhibit it, if you don't live by it, if you don't trust it. Matter of fact, in Ephesians chapter 2, as Paul lets us know in verses 8 through 10, he says that we come to God by faith for salvation. He makes it clear that it says we're all saved by grace through faith. And it is not of ourselves. It is the gift of God, lest anyone should boast. So even there, for us to come to God for salvation, we must have faith. We must have that pistis, that Greek, that belief, that trust that he's able to save us. And we started out this whole series from John 20 when Jesus rebuked our friend Thomas and said, because you've seen me, you believe, but blessed, happy, complete are those who, having not seen, yet have believed. So we see that even in our salvation experience, it must occur through faith. So what's the big deal? Our salvation depends on our ability to have faith that God sent his son and that Jesus died on the cross and rose again, died on that cross and rose again so that we could be made right with him. We could have a righteousness that was not our own. Because of sin, we were separated. So we realize that faith really does matter for salvation, but I want us to go a little deeper. Not just for salvation, but also for living. For living this life, we must be people who seek to live by faith. So I don't want you to stay in that realm of impossible. I want you to move into the realm of possible. Here's the thing about it. Jesus told his disciples that if you have the faith of the grain of a mustard seed, he said that you could say to this mountain, be removed and be cast into the sea, it would be done for you. And I went in search of a seed. And this seed is so small that I had to put it in a container, because every time that I tried to leave the seed sitting alone by itself, I lost it. I could not keep up with it. So I had to put it in this container. This seed of a mustard seed is so small, so small. But Jesus said that if you had the faith of something of this size, you could do the impossible. We all know that we don't have the capacity to move a mountain and ultimately cause it to be thrown into the sea. And Jesus was using this metaphor because he wanted us to understand that it wasn't about the mountain, but it was about anything short of that. If you could move a mountain, then that means you could deal with anything else that you face in your life. And if you have faith to believe God, he can cause it to happen. And somebody might be saying today, but Bobby, I've been walking by faith, and it doesn't seem like it's happening like I hoped. It's not coming out. My prayers, my actions, I'm walking, I'm doing, but it's not happening. Well, I want to share something with you. It says God is a rewarder of those that diligently seek him in that verse 6. The thing about it is, us seeking him does not always turn out the way that we want it to. God is not a magic genie. You can't rub the lamp and whatever you're hoping for appears. In reality, when we move in faith and ask God to accomplish these supernatural, miraculous, unable to be done by ourselves kind of things, there's 4 possible answers that he could give. One might be go. You know, I talked about last week when Moses stretched out that fishing rod over the Red Sea and it parted. It was time for them to go. They had to go through. But then it also might be grow, as we're seeking to walk by faith and trust God for whatever it is. God knows we're not ready for it. I talked about that in a previous broadcast. We may want it, but he knows what's best for us. We're his children. We're just like, you know how you have, if you have children, and I had one of my daughter when she was very young, she asked me for a pony. And at that time, she was about 4 years old. And I knew that she wasn't ready for a pony, nor were we able to afford one. But because of that mountain moving faith, if she really had been ready, I would have believed God for a pony for her. But because I knew that she was too young, I said, you still have to grow. And that's the same way with our God, is that we may be asking him for things, but he doesn't answer right away, or he doesn't give them to us because he knows we're not ready. We still need to grow. But then the third answer that we may get is slow. And that means that it's going to happen, but only in God's time. If you remember, Abraham, who was the father of the faithful, and it says in Hebrews 11 that Sarah, his wife, also was a woman of faith. He told them that they were going to have a son of promise. And from that son, their descendants would be as many as the sand on the seashore, as many as the stars in the sky. We were at a conference last week in the North Carolina mountains, and it was so clear out there. We could see a galaxy full of stars. And that's what God said Abraham's descendants were going to look like through that child. But for those of you who read the word, who know what it says in the book of Genesis, it took 25 years from the time that God gave him that promise to when it was ultimately fulfilled. So God moved slow. And then the final answer to our faith is sometimes it's no, because it's not God's perfect divine will for you, for that to occur in your life. I remember when I was a kid, I used to read these books about famous athletes. I loved reading about people who, I'm going to say a name, you'll probably be like, who is that? Lou Alcindor. We know him as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I read a book about him in the Bronx and how he grew up, and one day he just shot up to be about 6'10", and the next thing you know, he was being recruited by every major college in the United States, and ultimately went to UCLA, had a storied career, won national championships there, went on to play for the Milwaukee Bucks, gave them their first NBA championship, and then went on to be with the Lakers and Magic Johnson and all those great guys, and won multiple championships. But back then I said, I want to be an NBA basketball player just like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That's what I said as a kid. But the reality of it is, it didn't happen. And it was, one, because of my faith. I didn't trust God through that process. But secondly, that wasn't his perfect will for me. He had ministry in mind at a very young age. At an age of 22, 23 years old, I was called into the ministry, which would have been at the beginning of my NBA career. That did not happen. So sometimes we have to be willing to accept no for an answer. So those are 4 components of how God can respond to our faith. But we've got to be the kind of people who seek after him and trust him for the outcome. The second thing that I want to talk about as we talk about this faith, it's a faith thing, is we've got to understand that most people have no faith. People who don't believe in God, which is the majority, that's the thing about it, we've got to understand, the majority of our world do not believe in the God of the Bible and his son, Jesus Christ. So they have no faith. You say, what do you mean? They have faith? That's right, they do have faith, but it's the wrong kind of faith. The faith that we're talking about that moves mountains and casts them into the sea is saving faith that leads to living faith. And that only can come from having a relationship with God through the Lord Jesus Christ. So in that sense, most people have no faith. If you look here in the book of Exodus chapter 32, you'll see in verse number 20 that this is what the Lord said about the people of Israel. And he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end will be, for they are a perverse or a twisted generation, children in whom is no faith. And you say, these were his children. Why would God say that they had no faith? I'm so glad you asked that question. It comes back to what had occurred when they went through the Red Sea and were in the wilderness. After a period of preparation, God had them to send 12 spies, 1 spy from each of the children of Israel, the 12 tribes, into the land of Canaan that God had promised that he was going to give to them. And I want to stick a pin right there. One of the things that's so crucial about your faith, because there's really a thin line between faith and foolishness. One of the things that you've got to be mindful of when it comes to living by faith, you have to be sure that God said it. You have to be sure that it's a promise that God has given to you. So God told him, he said, I'm going to take you to the land of Canaan and give it to you by promise. And so they sent these 12 spies into the land. And while they were there, they spied it out and they came back. It said that the fruit, hear me now, It said the fruit was so large, the grapes and the figs, that two men had to put a pole on their shoulders and between them carry the fruit on the pole. That's how large, how fruitful the land was when they brought it back. They were carrying it between two men. Can you imagine that? I've got some grapes at home, and they don't look anything like that. So they come back, and the problem was that 10 of them, even though they said, yes, it is a land that is flowing with milk and honey, and there are great riches, great natural resources in that land, they said there are people there who are giants. And it said, and one of the things that they said that really struck me, it said, we looked like grasshoppers in their eyes. Now, they didn't even have conversations. They were spies. They were sneaking around. They didn't have conversation with any of these giants. But they were putting words into the mouths of the giants that they looked like grasshoppers to them. This was all based upon their own fear. And you know, fear, F-E-A-R, is false evidence appearing real. It was their own fear that was driving them to make these kinds of assumptions. And those 10 men came back with that evil report, but there were 2 men who knew that God had made the promise to them, Joshua and Caleb. And it says that those 2 men refuted what the other 10 said, don't listen to them. It said that these people are bread to us, meaning that God has given us the ability by faith to go in there and take the land, to overcome them, to consume them. But yet the people did not listen to Caleb and Joshua, but instead listened to the bad report, the no faith report of the 10 spies. And as a result of that, they refused to go and take the land. My brothers and sisters, when God gives you a promise, you can bank on it. You can be sure that if He made a promise to you, that He is going to bring it to pass. But the question is, and this is the crux of this matter as to why they had no faith, they refused to obey. Faith that is living faith requires obedience. How many of us have had situations where God has made a promise to us and told us that He was going to fulfill it, but because of our fear, because of our lack of faith, maybe because we're letting other people get in our ears and tell us it's not possible. I was watching something on television last night, and it was a true story. And he said that growing up, his father told him that he wasn't going to amount to anything. And I was struck by that because my mother who raised me, she never said that. My stepfather, they always told us, you can accomplish anything. You're capable of anything. And we know there's limitations to that based upon physical limitations, mental limitations, intellectual. There are limitations to that. But they never told me that I wasn't going to amount to anything. But that's what this fella said that his parents told him. He wasn't going to amount to anything. So that tape, that negative, no faith tape played over and over in his head. And he had to push through that in order to live out what God had in store for him. It's not always easy. And somebody's watching today. You maybe were told something similar by your parents or by people who thought they were well-meaning because of maybe some limitation you had, and they held you back by telling you what you could not do. But I came by here today to let you know that if you trust in God and you exercise, you move in faith, He can do what no one else can do. Going back to what I said earlier about it is impossible to please God without faith. Jesus said, this is what Jesus said. He said, those things that are impossible with humans is possible with God. So I want to encourage you today to know that if you trust God, he can accomplish anything in your life. So that's why God said that these people, his own people, had no faith, was when they refused to go into the land of Canaan and conquer it. And you know the rest of the story. Like Paul Harvey said, they ended up wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years. I know for some of you youngsters, you're like, who the heck is Paul Harvey? But anyway, you can Google him. You'll find out he's a great guy. But for 40 years, it says they wandered around in the wilderness until that generation that had no faith died off. And the only two people who were able to enter the land of Canaan and take possession was Caleb and Joshua from that generation of people. And it was a new generation who were raised up to be able to go into the land of Canaan. And I want to say something right there. I want to speak to a new generation. Those of you who are younger in the faith, younger in age, but you're hungry for God and you want all that he has for you, be the person who's willing to move in faith, to trust God. Don't be like so many around us who they look at the surroundings, they look at the giants, they look at themselves and use what other people have said about them or their own opinion of who they are as a reason not to accomplish great things, not to be who God who had called them to be. I want to encourage you, young folks, be who God has called you to be. And when it comes to pass, don't try to take any glory. Even though we're co-workers with him, make sure you give him the glory. Say it was for my good, but it was for his glory, because he's the one that ultimately caused it to come to pass. So I wanted to make sure you know that there is a thin line between faith and foolishness. But the key is knowing that God told you to do it and that you move in faith and you'll see it come to pass. My last point today, as we talk about, it's all about faith. It's a faith thing. I have a question for you today. As the text says, when the Son of Man comes, will he really find faith on the earth? My question is, what about you? What about you? Are you ready to be a faither? Are you ready to be that next generation who moves in faith? There was a guy who had gone hiking. And as he was going up the hill, I had the privilege of going hiking this past week up into the foothills of the mountains there in North Carolina. It was fabulous. But about halfway up, I changed my mind. I was by myself. I had seen a sign on the road that had this image on it of this bear, a silhouette of a black bear as we were driving around. So as I'm going up the mountain, about halfway up, I thought about that image of that bear and realized there was nobody else with me. I didn't want to become bear food. And if I played dead, I might still get mauled. I can imagine coming back down and my wife saying, "What happened to you?" So I decided in faith to turn around and come back. But this guy, he was climbing up the side of a mountain and he lost his footing. And he began to fall. And he was able to reach out and he grabbed a branch that was growing out of the side of the mountain in a grassy section. And he was holding on. Maybe you're like that guy. Maybe you were moving in faith and you fell. It happens. We stumble. The Bible says, though a good man or woman may fall 7 times, says that the Lord will raise them up again. But maybe you've fallen, but you've been able to grab on. And now you're like some of us. You're out on a limb. You're out there on that limb and you don't know what to do. And this guy was out there and he began to crowd, hey, hey, help, help, help. And he hears a voice that says, hey, I hear you. What do you want? He said, I've fallen and I'm out here on this limb. I need someone to help me. And the voice from above said, I'm willing to help you, but you have to let go of the branch. And the guy began to cry out again. He said, please come and grab me. Come and save me. And the voice said, you came out here in faith. So I want you to continue to walk by faith and just let go of the branch. Said the guy, paused for a minute, and then said, is there anybody else up there? What about you today? Sometimes walking by faith doesn't turn out like we hope. I want you to know that living a faith life, there's a 50-50 outcome. Here's the thing. When you look in Hebrews 11, it says that half of the folks had these great outcomes. They subdued kingdoms. They shut the mouths of lions. They had children when they were past the age, like Abraham and Sarah. So many great outcomes. But then there's another group that it says that they were cut in two, that they were killed, they were beheaded, that they suffered greatly for their faith. We don't know what the outcome of our faith will be, but Jesus said, "O faithless and perverse generation, how long will I be with you? How long shall I bear with you?" And he was talking about a boy who needed to be healed. He said, "Bring him here to me." Here's what I'm going to leave you with today as I talk about what about you. In 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5, it says, "Examine yourselves as to whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves." You've got to be willing to put yourself to the test and determine whether or not you're willing to walk by faith, regardless of the outcome, and trust God for the result. God bless you today. I'm willing to go anywhere with you, provided it's forward. So I want to encourage you today to go forward in faith. And I've got a book that I've written called Through It All, and it encourages you to overcome fear, to overcome relationship failures, to overcome circumstances that have been beyond your control, maybe mental health, depression, anxiety. This book, Through It All, will help you deal with every one of those circumstances. So I encourage you today to get this book, and it will be a blessing to you and a resource to help you to continue to go forward in faith.